Hey guys! Tonight we're heading deep into the Amazon rainforest, into a world where vines eat stone and trees swallow time. You're not flying over it. You're down here, under the dripping canopy, brushing past leaves the size of surfboards, breathing air so heavy you could chew it. And somewhere in this green abyss, entire forgotten cities. That's right, massive, complex 13th century urban networks built by people whose names most history books won't even mention. And the kicker? We didn't even believe they existed until just a few years ago. You'll be walking through ghost roads that haven't seen light in centuries. You'll wade across streams that once ran through marketplaces. And yes, you'll probably be bitten by at least one mosquito with ancient territorial grudges. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I always want to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the heart of the Amazon basin. Not the travel brochure version with river cruises and tropical birds, but the real Amazon. Swampy, buzzing, claustrophobic. This place hums with an energy that feels ancient, suspiciously watchful, like the forest remembers what you forgot. The ground beneath your boots isn't random. It was once paved. Sort of. Beneath the muck lies compacted earth, the faint remnants of engineered causeways that connected sprawling urban clusters. These weren't isolated villages. They were cities, interconnected and humming with life long before Europeans ever dreamed of South America. The jungle, as it turns out, has a remarkable talent for swallowing evidence. Give it a few hundred years and it will reclaim anything. Palaces, plazas, pyramids. Imagine burying Manhattan in fast-growing kudzu and giving it 4 rainy centuries. That's the level of concealment we're talking about. Somewhere above you, a monkey howls like it just stubbed its toe on a tree branch. Welcome to the soundtrack. You edge past a gnarled kapok tree whose roots could trip a tank, and there it is. Your first real glimpse. A stone step, half hidden by moss. Not much, but it's out of place. You didn't come here to find tourist ruins. You came to find the ones no one's cleaned up. And this, covered in vines and baked in centuries of humidity, is your welcome mat. The ground here tells stories if you know how to listen. Beneath your feet, ceramic shards crunch faintly. Fragments of pots, maybe burial urns. Every piece is a breadcrumb. Scientists have begun mapping out these remains into actual city outlines, residential zones, ceremonial centers, agricultural fields, and weirdly consistent road alignments. Some of these layouts are so organized they'd make your local city council look sloppy. Back in the early 2000s, everyone still thought this part of the world was just too harsh for civilization. The narrative was simple. Too many bugs, too little protein, soils too weak, game too sparse. But that myth is crumbling, leaf by stubborn leaf. Here's a fringe detail to chew on. There's evidence the people here had artificial forests. Basically, orchards designed with more math than your high school geometry class. These weren't wild jungles. They were planned botanical districts. Trees chosen for food, medicine, ceremony. It's like discovering Central Park was secretly a farm all along. But not everyone agrees on the scale. Scientists still argue, as they tend to, about whether these formations qualify as cities or something more fluid. A network? A garden-state alliance? The lack of stone architecture makes classification slippery. And while LiDAR is rewriting the map, we're still figuring out how deep this rabbit hole goes. Your sweat beads up. It's 90% humidity, and you're only 5 minutes in. But your senses are tuning in now. You spot a slanted ridge, barely there, but man-made. Defensive wall? House platform? Whatever it was, the forest didn't care. It wrapped it up like a birthday present no one opened for 700 years. Oh, and don't forget the insects. They rule here. Termites build towers taller than toddlers. Ants form living bridges. And somewhere in this mess, ancient civilizations thrived, not despite the ecosystem, but through it. A parrot screams overhead, and you're pretty sure it's laughing at you. But you're not alone. These trees, they've seen it all. You just arrived late to the party. You keep walking. The mud tugs at your boots, like it wants to keep them, and the air is thickening with that jungle blend of rot, flowers, and mystery meat. But something strange catches your eye. A long ridge, unnaturally straight, leading off into the green. You follow it. It turns out to be a causeway, slightly raised, still stubbornly resisting erosion after centuries. It feels wrong for something so geometric to be here, among roots and randomness. That's the thing about these ancient Amazonian cities. They didn't just pop up willy-nilly like tree houses. They were built with intention. And some of the most surprising features are the ones that mimic city planning from faraway civilizations. We're talking gridded layouts, centralized plazas, even hierarchical zoning, where elites lived on raised platforms and the general population spread out around them. Then there's the matter of pyramids. Not the giant limestone wonders of Giza, no, but earthen mounds, broad and stepped, topped with wooden structures long since rotted away. You're standing at the base of one now. From the bottom, it's just a weird bump in the forest. But if you scale it, which you do, slipping slightly on moss, you realize the view it offers isn't accidental. The platform gives a clear line of sight to other similar mounds in the distance. Signaling towers, temples, grandstand seating for some long-forgotten jungle football match. Mainstream geography used to ignore this stuff. Western explorers didn't expect cities here, so they just didn't see them. Early 20th century researchers wandered through overgrown ruins and chalked it up to natural formations. Because apparently, nature just loves building rectangular platforms with drainage systems. But here's a juicy, under-the-radar detail. Some of these causeways extend for miles. We're talking ancient highways, engineered with gravel bases, retaining walls, and even primitive culverts to manage floodwater. One such network near the Xingu River runs in long, ruler-straight lines that connect dozens of settlements, some so faint that only satellite imaging picks them up. Now picture the logistics of that. No wheels, no metal tools, no pack animals, just human hands and maybe a few llamas looking mildly annoyed. Yet they pulled it off. Of course, your path is less majestic. You're clambering over roots, ducking branches, and trying not to fall face first into a hidden termite nest. You're welcome for that one. But even amid the bugs and sweat, you can feel it. These were not wild tribes eking out a living. These were organized societies, likely with complex governance, religion, and trade. Archaeologists now think these cities had populations in the tens of thousands, possibly more if you count the surrounding agricultural zones. That's bigger than most European cities of the same era. Let that one settle in. And while we're on surprises, many of these urban centers had moats, defensive ditches carved into the clay, filled with water, and often ringed by palisade walls. You stop by one now. It's overgrown, yes, but its U-shape remains oddly crisp. A frog plops into the water as you step closer, and somewhere in the bushes, something definitely hisses. Probably just a snake. Maybe. But again, not everyone agrees. Scientists still argue about what qualifies as a city in this context. Some say the Amazon's urban areas were more like garden cities, part settlement, part food forest, designed to integrate with the jungle rather than bulldoze it. It wasn't a matter of conquering nature, it was about collaborating with it. Which brings us back to this pyramid under your feet. It's not alone. Researchers have found clusters of them, often aligned with solstices or cardinal directions. They weren't just buildings, they were calendars, temples, possibly even sound stages for ritual chanting. Some platforms seem acoustically tuned to carry voices farther than normal. Whether that was deliberate or happy accident remains, a matter of scholarly debate. You sit down for a second, catching your breath. The bugs respect nothing, least of all your need for a peaceful moment. But as you look around, the forest seems to shift. You begin to see patterns. Lines of palm trees planted too neatly. Little clusters of fruit trees that bloom in unnatural synchrony. It's like the jungle is trying to whisper, "We remember." The ancient builders here didn't fight the jungle. They manipulated it. They raised their cities just high enough to avoid flooding, oriented their roads to the stars, and carved their temples out of earth instead of stone. Not because they didn't know how to work with stone, but because they understood that the forest would reclaim anything. So why not build with the land itself? Still, there's something humbling about standing on this mound, sweating through your shirt, knowing that hundreds of years ago, someone else stood in the exact same spot, probably with fewer blisters and a much better sense of direction. You stand up and descend the mound, the forest closing in once again. Ahead, you spot another strange line, like a wall, but made of compacted clay. It seems to form a square, barely noticeable beneath the moss and saplings. A courtyard, a granary, a school for jungle accountants? The jungle doesn't say. It just watches. You follow the outline of that strange clay wall, circling it slowly, careful not to trip over a root masquerading as solid ground. The square it forms is too clean to be accidental, and soon you notice that it isn't alone. To your left, another rectangle, then another, each just a few paces apart, partially sunken, barely perceptible beneath the leaf litter, but your eyes are tuned now. You're beginning to see it, the ghost grid. Welcome to the lost cities of the Upper Xingu. Here in this patch of Brazil, buried beneath centuries of foliage, lies one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries of the 21st century. Not because of golden idols or dramatic ruins, but because of geometry. These cities, arranged in deliberate layouts, follow repeating patterns. Plazas at the center, wide ceremonial roads radiating outward, residential areas evenly spaced like planned suburbs. It's ancient urban design, with a symmetry that would make even the Romans nod respectfully. From above, especially with modern LiDAR scans, the whole thing lights up like circuitry. Scholars call them galactic clusters, a poetic name for a very real thing. Multiple settlements orbiting a core site, all linked by perfectly straight roads. These aren't paths that meander lazily through the brush. They cut clean through hills and swamps, with embankments still visible today if you know where to squint. And yet, you almost stepped over one without noticing. You press forward along one of these ghost roads, each step landing on ground that, hundreds of years ago, might have echoed with the shuffle of feet, the clatter of pottery, the chants of festivals. The people who lived here weren't lost tribes wandering the wilderness. They were city dwellers, gardeners, astronomers, engineers. Scientists still argue, though, about how densely populated these clusters really were. Some claim the biggest cities house 10,000 or more. Others suggest lower numbers, citing seasonal movement and flexible residency. But either way, this wasn't an accidental village that just got out of hand. It was deliberate, calculated, engineered. And here's something your travel brochure definitely left out. There are no stones. Not because they didn't know how to work with them, but because the region has no stones. Unlike the Inca or Maya, Amazonian city builders had to rely on earth, wood, and vegetation. That's why it all vanished so cleanly. Wood rots, earth crumbles, vines swallow it all. But the design? That lingers. A mainstream geographical fact that gets glossed over far too often is this. The Amazon basin spans over 6.7 million square kilometers, larger than the entire European Union. It's not one jungle. It's thousands of microclimates, ecosystems, and cultural regions mashed together. And in the upper Xingu, the forest wasn't just a setting, it was part of the infrastructure. Here's a fringe tidbit that makes your eyebrows do weird things. In some areas, researchers found subtle curvatures in the road layout that seem to follow solar arcs. That's right, roads possibly aligned to celestial bodies. You think it's hard to find north without a compass? These people aligned causeways to the sun. While you're here struggling to find a dry sock, a tree frog plops onto your shoulder, surveys you judgmentally, and hops off without a word. Rude. You continue down the ancient boulevard, ducking vines and slipping a little on slick bark. On either side, the land rises into low platforms, housing probably. Each one once topped with a thatched wooden house, long since consumed by the rainforest. But even the voids feel lived in. You can almost hear the rhythm of ancient foot traffic, the hum of activity, the distant thump of drums during some long-forgotten festival. There's a moment when the trees thin slightly, just enough for light to pierce through and dance on the undergrowth. And there, barely visible, are the remains of a causeway intersection, two ancient roads meeting at a right angle. It's a moment of eerie familiarity, like standing at a suburban street corner in a dream. These intersections weren't random. They anchored city layouts, ceremonial centers, trade paths. And they suggest something else, too, communication. These weren't isolated micro-civilizations. They were connected. Messages, goods, possibly even pilgrimages, flowed between settlements along these forest boulevards. But of course, there's still debate. Some researchers argue the clusters were part of loose tribal federations, not cities in the traditional sense. Others insist they meet every metric for urbanity: population size, infrastructure, planning, permanence. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Jungle cities may not fit neatly into our classical categories, but that's not their fault. It's ours for having such narrow definitions. You crouch near the base of a tree, running your hand along a faint embankment, wondering how many people pass this same point with baskets of manioc or jugs of fermented fruit beer. There's no signage, no ruins, no fence with an important historical site label. Just you, the mud, and the memory of something massive. A hummingbird zips past your face like a caffeinated bullet. You blink. Welcome back to the present. It's hard to believe that so many symmetrical, carefully designed places could be forgotten for so long. But the jungle is the world's most committed interior decorator. It covers everything with the same chaotic, beautiful mess. Without ground surveys and airborne lasers, the very idea of cities here would still sound like fantasy. But now you know. And now you see it. The Amazon didn't erase its cities. It preserved them. It just asked you to look harder. The air thickens as you descend a slight incline, your boots squelching with every step. You glance down and realize this isn't just any patch of earth. It's dark, unnaturally dark, rich, deep, almost black soil with a strangely sweet smell, like compost and charcoal had a love child. You kneel and run a handful of it through your fingers. This isn't the leached, nutrient-poor soil most people associate with the Amazon. This stuff is alive. This is terra preta. It's one of the Amazon's most baffling secrets, man-made soil that shouldn't exist. Unlike the surrounding red clay that turns to sludge after a few seasons, terra preta stays fertile for centuries. Somehow, people in the Amazon centuries ago figured out how to reverse engineer soil. And not just any soil, the perfect blend of charcoal, bone, fish scraps, broken pottery, and organic waste cooked low and slow like grandma's secret stew recipe. You glance around and notice the patch is surprisingly wide. That's the giveaway. Natural soil doesn't do this. But human-made terra preta, it sprawls across hectares. Some of it even has consistent carbon signatures that match across distant regions, suggesting shared techniques, or maybe even shared knowledge networks. Scientists still argue, as they always do, about exactly how terra preta was made. Was it an intentional innovation or a happy accident that scaled over generations? Some think it was a byproduct of refuse pits, gradually improved by ancestral trial and error. Others argue it was part of a conscious agricultural strategy. Either way, the result is almost alchemical. Soil that improves over time instead of degrading. Talk about sustainable gardening. You're now walking through what was once a food-producing zone, though it probably didn't look like one. No rows, no fences. Instead, imagine orchards of Brazil nuts, peach palms, cacao, and acai trees. Forests designed to appear wild, but function like farms. The ancient Amazonian version of a Whole Foods, but with more bugs and less judgmental signage. Here's a fringe detail. In some spots, terra preta is so distinct from the surrounding soil that satellite imaging can pick it up. That's right, your compost pile has a spectral signature from space. It's like the land itself remembers who cared for it. You find a shard of pottery embedded in the earth, red clay with a faint painted spiral, maybe once part of a bowl. Pieces like this are common in terra preta, not as artifacts of artistry, but as part of the recipe. Crushed ceramics help with moisture retention and microbial health. They were literally putting culture into agriculture. And the reach of this technique is astonishing. Some estimates suggest terra preta covers up to 10% of the Amazon basin. Millions of acres of engineered soil. That's not the work of a few villages. That's civilizational. You pause because the implications sneak up on you. This wasn't subsistence farming. This was planned, scalable, and shared. A technology passed across regions, probably through trade or intermarriage, maybe even ritual exchange. And for centuries, it worked until it didn't. Because eventually, something happened. The cities fell silent. The orchards grew wild. The engineered soil kept working, but the people were gone. You squint into the trees. The line between wild and planned gets fuzzier the longer you stare. That Brazil nut tree, not random, that cluster of palms, definitely deliberate. You're in the middle of a ghost farm, an edible landscape designed to feed thousands without ever clearing the forest. It was the opposite of modern monoculture. They didn't fight the jungle. They edited it. Mainstream geography textbooks used to claim that the Amazon couldn't support large-scale agriculture because of poor soil quality. But the existence of terra preta flips that logic. The soil isn't poor. It's just untamed. The people who lived here didn't see dirt as a limit. They saw it as an invitation. And while we're digging, pun very intended, there's a long-standing scholarly scuffle over whether terra preta was also tied to social status. Did elite families control its creation? Was it a communal resource? Did it mark spiritual centers or high-density areas? The answers, as usual, are buried somewhere under your feet, waiting to be interpreted by someone with a trowel and tenure. You brush your hand across the ground one more time, then rise and move forward. The black soil gradually gives way to duller clay, less alive, more anonymous. It's like stepping out of history and back into wilderness. But the forest remembers. Even where the terra preta ends, the plants that grew in it often continue for generations. That cacao tree ahead, a ghost survivor of ancient planning. That patch of cassava, probably the great-great-great-grandchild of a domesticated crop line planted before Columbus even got lost at sea. Another weird tidbit: modern Amazonians sometimes stumble across these terra preta patches and immediately recognize their value. They don't always know the full backstory, but they know that whatever lived here before, it knew how to make the land sing. You stop at the edge of a stream, shallow, brown, slow-moving. It doesn't look like much, but this could have been part of an irrigation channel. Raised fields, artificial wetlands, maybe even fish traps. Because food wasn't just grown here. It was coaxed, invited, nurtured through partnership with land and water. That partnership echoes now in every healthy root and fruit-bearing tree. It's in the hush of the leaves. It's in the soil that still breathes beneath your feet. You cross the shallow stream with a cautious hop, then immediately regret it when the muddy bank tries to eat your boot. One loud squelch later, and you're free, only slightly wetter and considerably less dignified. Welcome to the Amazon, where the land likes to remind you who's boss. You swipe at a mosquito the size of a ping-pong ball and mutter something your mother wouldn't want to hear. But as you trek forward, deeper into the green, it dawns on you that these very mosquitoes, along with the jungle's general hostility, played a starring role in hiding ancient cities for centuries. See, for a long time, the prevailing academic idea was simple. The Amazon was too brutal for large-scale human civilization. The bugs, the floods, the thin soil, the heat, it all pointed to one conclusion. No way people built cities here. Maybe scattered tribes, maybe temporary camps, but real settlements? Nah. And so, explorers came through, got bitten half to death, and left with the same assumption. This place is naturally unlivable. The jungle, they figured, has always been this wild, but it wasn't. What they failed to see, mostly because they were too busy scratching bites and hallucinating from fever, was that the Amazon wasn't untouched wilderness. It was an abandoned masterpiece, a carefully managed ecosystem that had been left to its own devices after the collapse of the civilizations that once curated it. You pause under the outstretched limbs of a kiba tree, its trunk as thick as a city bus, its roots fanning out like wooden wings. It's beautiful, and it's exactly the kind of thing early explorers would have stared at in awe, completely missing the subtle ditches and raised walkways right beside it. Here's a mainstream fact that's only recently started to crack open in textbooks. Europeans brought with them more than metal and maps. They also brought smallpox, measles, and a bouquet of other pathogens the local populations had no immunity against. Some researchers estimate that within just a few decades of first contact, up to 90% of the indigenous population across the Americas died. 90%. And when that happens, when an entire civilization disappears almost overnight, what happens to their cities, their farms, their roads and plazas and irrigation systems? The forest takes them back. Fast. There's a fringe theory that some of the jungle's thickness today is a direct result of this depopulation, that what we now think of as virgin forest might actually be overgrown farmland. Fields and orchards run wild, unattended. It's like showing up at Versailles 200 years after the gardeners vanished. Scientists still argue about how quickly that transformation happened. Some say within decades, vines could have swallowed entire cities. Others suggest it took longer, with buildings collapsing first, the jungle gradually erasing the footprint. But either way, by the time explorers returned with better gear and worse maps, there was little left to find. You step onto another faint ridge, a raised roadbed. It leads into a thicket of vines and fallen logs, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. But it's straight and intentional. These roads weren't built for wandering. They had destinations. You imagine two people walking here centuries ago, traders maybe, or messengers. They would have passed gardens, houses, sacred spaces. Now it's all trees and mosquitoes. And speaking of those mosquitoes, the idea that they made the region inhospitable is a bit of a myth too. Indigenous people had all sorts of techniques for dealing with biting insects: smoke rituals, herbal repellents, even fish-based traps to control larvae in wet zones. There's even some deeply speculative chatter that crocodile dung was once used as a kind of natural bug paste. You can decide for yourself whether that's genius or madness. But the point is, they adapted. They thrived. They didn't see the jungle as hostile. They saw it as home. It's only hostile if you don't know the language. The irony is thick. European colonists looked around, saw no stone monuments or obvious farmland, and assumed nothing advanced ever existed here. They missed the point entirely. The jungle didn't erase cities. It preserved them in green camouflage. But if your eyes are trained only to see Rome or Athens, you'll walk right past an Amazonian metropolis and call it a forest. You step around a tree whose roots have completely swallowed a ceramic jar. Only the rim peeks out, like the forest is taking a slow bite. That jar might have once held fermented chicha or manioc flour. Now it holds dirt and silence. So, what do we take from this? That the Amazon isn't just a green void between empires. It was an empire, or many of them, a patchwork of cultures, each with its own language, architecture, agriculture, and calendar. The jungle didn't hide them because they failed. It hid them because we stopped listening. You pause at a small clearing, ringed by trees that feel oddly evenly spaced. Maybe it's random. Maybe it's another orchard, long since gone feral. The light filters through in golden shafts, and for a moment, the jungle is quiet. Not silent, just calm. It's easy to forget in all the sweat and squinting and bug swatting that this place wanted to be lived in. And it was, brilliantly, for centuries, until a wave of sickness and steel silenced it all. You move quietly now, following another subtle path, barely a rise in the earth, flanked by trees that almost seem to lean in as you pass. The air is quieter here, heavy, as if the forest is holding its breath. And suddenly, it hits you. Something's off. There's no rubble, no tumbled columns or cracked stone walls, just empty shapes and lines in the earth. It's unsettling, really. You're walking through what was once a city, but there's nothing towering or obvious to grab your attention. No temples like Angkor Wat, no pyramids like Chichen Itza, no crumbling colosseums. Just the whisper of organization under layers of green. That's because Amazonian civilizations didn't build in stone. They built with wood, earth, and plant fiber, materials that worked with the forest, not against it. Functional, renewable, biodegradable. Genius, honestly, but also tragically ephemeral. So now you're navigating cities with no visible walls, and it's messing with your head. You step into what feels like a clearing, only to realize it was once a plaza, flat, compacted, bordered by subtle berms. Maybe a market once bustled here, or a place of ceremony, or just an open space where kids ran in circles while their parents discussed the harvest. But there's no signage, no surviving artifacts that scream, "This was important." You just have to feel it. Here's a mainstream fact that complicates things. In most ancient societies we celebrate today, permanence was expressed through stone. Egypt, Greece, the Inca, even the Olmec left behind hefty heads carved from basalt. But in the Amazon, durability came through systems, not structures. These were cultures that invested in soil, roads, and relationships, things that could be passed down without leaving skyscrapers behind. Scientists still argue over whether that makes these settlements less advanced, a deeply awkward phrase that often reveals more about the scientists than the civilizations. Is a society less advanced because it didn't leave behind statues of gods with wings and thunderbolts? Or is it maybe more advanced for understanding that the forest reclaims all and building accordingly? You duck under a branch and enter another wide space, a ring, faint but unmistakable, a circle of earth, slightly elevated, surrounded by smaller mounds. It's one of the famous Amazonian circular village layouts, discovered, dismissed, and only recently understood. These weren't just artistic flukes. They were intentional designs. The central ring would have been a communal plaza. The smaller circles around it, homes, probably, or ritual spaces. The spacing is consistent. The orientation often tied to solar positions. It's urban planning, just not the concrete and grid kind. You imagine standing here during a solstice celebration. Drums, painted faces, firelight flickering on the walls of wooden longhouses, smoke rising through the canopy, the air filled with song and citrus. Now, it's just birdsong and wind. But if you listen closely, you can still feel the rhythm. A fringe theory suggests these circular layouts mirrored cosmological beliefs, that they weren't just practical, but symbolic. The village was the universe in miniature. The center plaza, the sun, the houses, the stars, the ring, the cycle of time. It's a theory that blends anthropology with astronomy and a touch of poetic flair, which, frankly, makes it more fun. You take another step, and your boot crunches something hollow. You freeze, look down. It's a log, rotted nearly to pulp, but still vaguely rectangular. Could have been part of a foundation, or a bench, or just a tree that fell weird. The jungle doesn't label things. And yet, your brain starts filling in the blanks. That ringed space wasn't just a layout, it was a neighborhood. People lived here, laughed here, argued here, built traditions here. And then, eventually, they left, or died, or were swept away by a history that refused to remember them. Except, the jungle does remember. You're just not very fluent. Another mainstream idea that's being re-examined is the notion that real cities require massive, visible infrastructure. Skyscrapers, temples, the kind of stuff you can see from a helicopter. But Amazonian cities challenge that. They were built low to the ground, dispersed, integrated into the ecology, more like biological organisms than architectural statements. Think of them like coral reefs, alive, interconnected, evolving, and totally dependent on the surrounding environment. But unlike coral reefs, they left almost no skeleton behind. And yet here you are, walking the ghost outline of a vanished city, one that predates Machu Picchu, one that might have rivaled it in complexity, if not in limestone bling. Here's a strange little tidbit to chew on. In some areas, archaeologists have found what appear to be forest clearings maintained by fire, spaced at regular intervals. These weren't accidental. They were like breathing holes in the forest, created and sustained to encourage biodiversity, attract game, or support specific crops. They're part of the city's design, too, just not in the way modern zoning maps would show. You pause again, wipe sweat from your brow. The forest is louder now. Bugs, birds, a rustle in the leaves that might be a monkey, or might just be your imagination. You're starting to understand the scale of what was here. Not just buildings, not just roads, but entire worldviews made real, then forgotten. And the weirdest part? It worked. These people built cities without destroying the forest. They lived in balance with an ecosystem most of us still think of as untamable. Their legacy isn't in stone blocks. It's in dark soil, tree patterns, forgotten paths, in structures you have to feel to find. You take one last look at the circle. The trees sway. The wind carries a whisper you can't quite decipher. Then you move on, deeper into the green. You push forward, brushing past a curtain of lianas that hang like nature's bead door, and stumble into something unexpected, a clearing with shapes. Not just the vague outlines of roads or plazas, but actual geometric figures, circles, squares, intersecting lines, carved right into the ground. At first, you think it might be natural erosion or animal trails, but then you look again. The ditch is too perfect, the ring too round. A few paces over, you spot another, then another, and then a full-on complex of connected designs. Some are double-ringed, others are shaped like keys or claws or abstract birds. You're standing in the middle of an earthwork symphony. Welcome to the Amazon's secret art gallery, the geoglyphs. These massive ground carvings remained hidden until just a few decades ago, when deforestation tragically exposed them from above. Satellite imagery and aerial surveys began to show weird scars in the landscape. Huge human-made forms etched into the clay, many spanning hundreds of feet across. Circles, rectangles, labyrinths, some symmetrical, some chaotic, all deeply intentional. And here's the kicker. They're ancient. Some date back over 2,000 years, long before most of the jungle civilizations we've been walking through so far. That means the Amazon wasn't just home to cities in the 13th century. It had a legacy of complex societies going back way further. Scientists still argue, of course, about what the geoglyphs meant. Were they ceremonial, astronomical, territorial markers? Some align with solar events, suggesting calendar use. Others form animal shapes, inviting comparisons to the famous Nazca lines in Peru, though these geoglyphs are made by ditching rather than piling and aren't meant to be seen from the sky. At least not by us. A fringe theory, and a fun one, suggests they were designed to be viewed from above, just not by humans. Perhaps spirit beings, sky gods, shamans in trance. You're welcome to pick your favorite. You pace slowly around one of the larger rings, your boots tracing the edge of a ditch that's 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep. The soil here is compacted, deliberate, not natural erosion. This was carved. Some archaeologists estimate it would have taken thousands of hours with wooden tools and communal labor. Which begs the question, why? Why spend so much time etching massive shapes into the landscape that no one at ground level can fully appreciate? Maybe because the act of building them was the point. Ritual, ceremony, collective identity. Or maybe they were used in performances, each shape a stage. One theory proposes that the ditches helped amplify sound, chanting or drumming reverberating through the earth like jungle sonar. As you move deeper into the cluster, you notice how the trees change. Younger growth, different species, as if something interrupted the forest's usual rhythm. Turns out, many of these geoglyphs are in areas where the forest was cleared and regrown multiple times. Some sites show layers of soil that alternate between wild growth and human occupation. A rhythm of presence and absence, like breath. And here's a mainstream geographical fact most people miss. The southwestern Amazon, where most geoglyphs are found, is a seasonal forest. It floods, then dries, then floods again. Perfect for agriculture, tricky for stone construction, ideal for societies that were adaptable and fluid, which these geoglyph builders clearly were. But the question lingers. Are these shapes connected to the 13th century cities we've been walking through? Or were they built by entirely different cultures, long gone by the time those later urban centers rose? That's still hotly debated. Some argue the geoglyphs are spiritual ancestors to the cities, precursors in design and intention. Others think they're separate chapters of Amazonian history, unconnected except by landscape. Either way, the message is clear. Someone was here. And they weren't just surviving. They were building, expressing, organizing, dreaming on a scale we still don't fully understand. You walk the diameter of a giant square, counting your steps. 40, 50, 60. It keeps going. This isn't a hut outline. It's a monumental space. Maybe a temple. Maybe a gathering ground. Maybe the jungle's version of an amphitheater. Or maybe just a message to time itself. We were here. And nature, ever the prankster, covered it up with shrubs, a strange detail. Some of the geoglyphs seem unfinished or modified. One circle abruptly cuts into a triangle. Another has a weird tail that goes nowhere. Did the builders run out of time? Was the design meant to be dynamic, evolving year by year? Or is it our modern eyes trying too hard to find logic in something symbolic? You pause in the center of a double-ringed structure. No sign, no plaque, just the soft creak of insects and a wind that moves only when it wants to. You close your eyes for a moment and picture a ceremony here. Figures in bright feathered headdresses, bare feet thumping the earth, hands raised to a sky brimming with stars. 1,000 years ago, this was a stage. Today it's a secret. You open your eyes. The vines haven't moved, but they seem closer. So many of these earthworks have only been partially mapped. For every geoglyph uncovered, there may be dozens more still hidden under undisturbed forest. And even now, with satellites and LiDAR, researchers estimate we've seen only a fraction of what exists. That's the scary, beautiful truth of the Amazon. You could be standing in a temple right now and not even know it. You take one last lap around the ring, then duck back under the trees. The canopy closes behind you, like a curtain dropping after the final act. The forest says nothing, but it remembers. You leave the geoglyphs behind, stepping cautiously back into the thicket, and soon the jungle swells around you once more, dense, wet, indifferent. It's hard to imagine how many cities, ceremonies, and stories this green world has absorbed. But now, we've come to one of the darkest chapters. You stop near the edge of a wide basin, where the ground dips slightly into a shallow depression. There's no standing water today, just mud and some startled frogs. But this dip could have been a reservoir or a bathing pond, something communal, something useful. And now, it's quiet, too quiet. Because here's where things start to vanish, not into the trees this time, but into thin air. You remember those ancient cities we've been wandering? The ones with plazas, geoglyphs, roads, and orchards? Around 1492, give or take, they were thriving. Within 100 years, most were gone. Not overthrown, not abandoned by choice, just emptied. The culprit? Disease? When European colonizers arrived in South America, they didn't just bring swords and ships. They brought invisible passengers: smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus. Germs that the indigenous immune systems had never met before. And they didn't just kill a few. They razed civilizations. Historians and anthropologists estimate that up to 90% of indigenous populations died from these diseases within just a few generations. Whole cities lost their elders, then their warriors, then their children. Communities collapsed, not through conquest, but through the quiet apocalypse of fever, cough, and despair. You crouch next to a wide tree trunk, imagining what this place looked like before the silence. The houses would have stood in rings, the streets busy, the plazas filled with trade and noise and laughter, and then nothing. A cough here, a fever there, a funeral, and then more. A few weeks later, you might have walked through and thought, oh, the jungle must have always been empty. Scientists still argue, of course, about exactly when and how these epidemics spread. Some believe disease reached deep into the continent even before physical European contact, traveling faster than ships, carried by trade routes and migration. Others say it followed the colonizers inland. Either way, the result was the same: rapid, catastrophic depopulation. And here's the haunting part: there are almost no mass graves, no ruins of hospitals or crisis centers. These weren't societies that built stone temples, remember? They vanished cleanly. One anthropologist called it the most thorough erasure in human history. You pass another slight mound. It's easy to miss. Could be just another termite hill, but its placement feels intentional. Maybe it was a burial mound, or the remains of a sacred site, or just a home left to decay as its owners disappeared. Some of the surviving oral histories tell of times when the world turned upside down. Stories of sickness that swept like wind, of people who went to sleep and never woke up. Myths that may not be myths at all, just memory, distorted by pain and time. But amid the devastation, some things lingered, practices passed down in secret, stories whispered in song. The cities were gone, but the knowledge, it flickered. And now, thanks to new tools, it's being rediscovered. You stop beside a shallow ditch, nearly lost under the leaf litter. It's narrow, curved, and runs alongside a platform that once supported a house. Some archaeologists believe these features were meant to drain water during heavy rain, preventing flooding in living spaces. They were part of a larger hydraulic system, adapted not just to survive the jungle, but to shape it. And here's a fringe detail that will make your brain stretch. Certain diseases introduced by Europeans didn't just kill people, they changed the forest itself. With fewer people to manage orchards, burn fields, and clear undergrowth, the jungle surged. Fast-growing species took over. Fire-resistant trees disappeared. Entire animal populations shifted. The Amazon you see today may be the regrowth of trauma, a forest that remembers being abandoned. Standing in this silence, that feels true. Another sobering thought. Many of the maps made by early colonizers show blank spaces where cities once were. Not because they were never there, but because by the time the cartographers came through, the cities had already vanished. They mistook absence for origin. Assumed the jungle had always been this untouched. But the jungle, as you've learned, is a master of disguise. You step into another clearing, this one different. It's oddly open, with low grass and widely spaced palms. Something about it feels curated. And it was. This may have been a village that collapsed in the early waves of plague. You can almost feel it. The absence, the pause in the soil, the quiet grief baked into the roots. And yet, despite all that loss, something endures. The forest adapted. And now, you are adapting too. Seeing through the foliage, catching glimpses of a civilization that history tried to erase. You press forward, past the clearing, feeling the weight of it all. Not sadness, exactly. Reverence. Like you're walking through a cathedral made of leaves. The sun filters through in slices, and the birds begin to sing again. The forest is still here, and in its way, so are they. The trail veers left, and with it, your mind drifts towards something most people never think about when imagining jungle life. Fish farming. Not fishing. Farming. As in, structured aquatic engineering thousands of years before anyone in Europe coined the term aquaculture. You kneel near a wide depression filled with stagnant water, ringed by thick reeds and humming with mosquitoes that don't believe in personal space. It doesn't look like much, just another jungle puddle. But step back far enough, and it forms part of a larger pattern, a series of connected ponds, ditches, and artificial channels. This wasn't a swamp, it was a system. These are fish weirs, ancient human-made aquaculture features that worked in tandem with seasonal floods. During the wet season, fish would swim in freely. During the dry season, they'd get stuck in contained pools, making them easier to catch. And not just for one family or tribe. This was large-scale, communal infrastructure. Modern researchers have found areas where hundreds of these ponds are interlinked, some stretching across kilometers of jungle, all carefully contoured with raised embankments and sluices. It's complex, it's precise, it's intentional, and it completely upends the old idea that the Amazon was a place of simple hunter-gatherers scraping by. Scientists still argue, predictably, about how widespread this aquaculture was. Some claim it was a central part of Amazonian urban life, like plumbing in Rome. Others think it was regional, specific to societies that had already developed higher forms of landscape engineering. Either way, it's now clear that these weren't just fish traps. They were farms, carefully managed, deeply understood, and integrated into the urban planning of these hidden cities. You watch as a small fish leaps from one murky pool into another, catching the light like a sliver of silver. The system still works, even after centuries of abandonment. That's the genius of it. These weren't built for short-term gain. They were designed to last. And fish weren't the only thing being cultivated. All around you, the forest bears the marks of human influence. Orchards of domesticated fruit trees, clusters of medicinal plants, and corridors of palms used for housing materials, oils, and food. This wasn't wilderness. It was an engineered ecosystem, a mosaic of biodiversity guided by human hands. Mainstream geography is just starting to catch up with this idea that what we call the natural Amazon is, in many areas, actually a cultural artifact. A long-term project of selective planting, pruning, and patterning passed down through generations. Entire patches of forest seem to favor edible or medicinal species in ratios that no wild environment could produce on its own. And here's a fringe fact for you. Some researchers now believe the most biodiverse parts of the Amazon, those famous hotspots with hundreds of tree species per hectare, might actually be human creations. Not untouched paradises, but the result of careful cultivation by societies who viewed the forest not as a barrier, but as a collaborator. You rise and follow a narrow, curved embankment, barely a foot tall, but clearly man-made. It connects two shallow ponds that once teemed with tambaki, pacu, and other protein-rich fish. Some researchers have even found wooden stakes embedded in the old pond beds, likely used to guide or trap fish during seasonal migrations. You imagine the scene. A dozen people in dugout canoes, guiding fish through channels with branches, laughing, calling out. Children wading into the shallows with woven baskets. Smoke from roasting fish curling into the canopy. You see none of that now, of course, just mud, a mosquito on your elbow, and trees. But look closer, and it's all still here. Another strange little detail. Some fish weirs are shaped like arrows or spirals, designs that suggest more than just practicality. Maybe ritual, maybe aesthetics, maybe just flair. One pond in Bolivia is lined with stones, in a zigzag pattern that would have been invisible from the ground, but unmistakable from a raised platform or small tower. These people weren't just building to eat. They were building with style. And don't get too smug with your GPS. Many of these systems still outperform modern efforts. Some archaeologists even admit, grudgingly, that they're embarrassingly efficient. The ancient ponds didn't require constant maintenance, didn't collapse after one bad season, and integrated seamlessly into the broader landscape. You pass another ditch, overgrown now, but still draining water into the lower pond. A natural filtration system, probably. Plants clean the water, fish thrive, people eat, nothing wasted, everything balanced. The more you look, the more it becomes clear. Amazonian civilizations didn't just live in the forest, they partnered with it. Every element, soil, water, fire, fish, trees, was part of an interconnected web. Not just survival, not even just abundance, but symbiosis. You rest for a moment on a mossy rock near the edge of a pond. Dragonflies hover like tiny helicopters. A frog makes a sound like a rubber band snapping. Somewhere in the trees, a howler monkey lets loose a wail that suggests it just stubbed its emotional toe. This place once fed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, without destroying the forest, without collapsing the ecosystem, without strip mining the land for short-term gain. It's hard not to feel humbled. You dip your hand into the warm water. It's murky, but calm. Still home to fish, frogs, snakes. If you're lucky, not the electric kind. The pond doesn't look like a monument. It won't be in any tourist brochures. But in its own quiet way, it's a masterpiece. One that still works. You climb a gentle slope now, following a path that doesn't exist on any map, but feels curiously direct, almost as if your boots are tracing an ancient memory. The ground firms up, and suddenly the trees thin slightly. The canopy remains overhead, of course. This is the Amazon. It's always overhead. But the light here feels different. You pause, because this is where the forest gave up its final secret. It couldn't hide everything. You're standing at the edge of one of the most astonishing archaeological revolutions in recent history. Not because of some grand excavation or buried statue, but because of a laser mounted to the belly of a plane. LiDAR, light detection, and ranging. A gentle pulse that scans the ground from above, slicing through the canopy, mapping the surface below in exquisite detail. For centuries, the jungle won the game of hide and seek. But with LiDAR, humanity finally peeked behind the curtain. And what we found? Cities. So many cities. In 2022, a team flying over parts of the Bolivian Amazon used LiDAR to scan what looked like unbroken jungle. What they discovered were urban centers stretching for miles, interconnected by wide causeways, filled with stepped platforms, pyramids, canals, reservoirs, ceremonial plazas. Not hypothetical shapes, not guesses, full-on city layouts. Suddenly, all the fringe theories, fish farms, garden forests, soil engineering, clicked together. This was civilization, confirmed, documented, vast. Scientists still argue about whether we're seeing one empire, a collection of cultures, or a patchwork of independently developed hubs. But nobody's arguing whether they were real anymore. You imagine looking out from one of those planes, watching the jungle blur beneath you, only to see it all light up. Straight lines, perfect squares, radial patterns, ringed causeways, star-shaped plazas. The map redrawn in neon green, centuries too late. LiDAR doesn't show trees. It shows the ground. which means you're seeing the bones of cities the forest had swallowed whole. And they're everywhere. One discovery in Ecuador revealed grid-planned settlements older than Machu Picchu. Another in Brazil traced ceremonial roadways that ran arrow-straight for miles. Roads now invisible at ground level, but unmistakable from the air. You continue walking, now aware that the path beneath your feet may have been part of that ancient grid. You wouldn't know it, looking at it now. There's no signage, just roots. But your mind overlays the LiDAR scans you've seen. Green forest peeled back to show city blocks and sacred geometry hiding in the clay. Here's a mainstream fact. Before LiDAR, archaeologists relied on machetes and satellite images, which meant years of clearing vegetation just to find the edge of a structure, one step at a time. Now, a 2-hour flight can produce data that takes 2 years to analyze. LiDAR doesn't give you artifacts, but it gives you proof. Patterns, alignments, layouts, the invisible cities made visible again. You kneel near a tree whose roots form a jagged ring and wonder if it's growing from the corner of a lost house. A LiDAR scan of this exact area might reveal a whole neighborhood hiding under the duff and branches. And here's a fringe tidbit for the late-night thinkers. Some of the LiDAR-discovered roads are so straight, so vast, and so interconnected that they suggest long-distance trade networks, maybe even pan-Amazonian ones. Imagine walking from one city to another without ever stepping off a raised road, shaded by engineered orchards, guided by signs now long gone. The sort of rainforest interstate system, with better snacks. You pass what looks like a small hill, but your eyes are trained now. It's not a hill. It's a platform, probably a stepped pyramid, once topped by a wooden structure, the stoneless version of a temple. LiDAR revealed hundreds of these across multiple regions, all similar in shape and placement, possibly built by different cultures, possibly reflecting shared cosmology, possibly just good architecture. The debate, as always, is lively. But here's what nobody disputes anymore. These were cities. Dense, complex, planned cities. And we missed them for centuries because the jungle is both generous and ruthless. It lets you live, but it does not leave your monuments untouched. You stop at the edge of a wide clearing. Not a plaza, not today. Just a patch where the trees haven't returned as densely. But LiDAR scans show that this was once a central gathering place, surrounded by roads, bounded by symmetrical structures, aligned to solstices. Now, it's quiet, except for the soft drip of moisture from a bromeliad above you, and the sudden, hysterical cackling of a toucan that sounds like it just heard a very inappropriate joke. The jungle has its own soundtrack. As you keep moving, you notice more signs. Slight bumps, aligned depressions, strangely straight tree lines. The kinds of things your eyes would have skipped before. But now, thanks to LiDAR, you see them, all of them. The revelation that came from the sky changed everything. It didn't just rewrite maps, it rewrote assumptions about what counts as civilization, about who gets remembered, about the stories we tell ourselves when we look at a forest and assume no one's ever lived there. You pause at a high point, turn in a slow circle, and imagine the trees dropping away, not from deforestation, but just lifted for a moment. Imagine seeing the whole hidden city spread beneath you, glowing with memory. LiDAR saw it first, But now you see it too. You follow the slope downward again, and soon the terrain flattens into a wide, mossy stretch that feels oddly sacred, quieter than usual, even for the jungle. Something about the spacing of the trees, the hush in the air. You slow your steps without realizing it. And then you see them. Well, not them exactly, not anymore, but where they stood. Circular depressions, shallow but cleanly edged, ringed by raised earth platforms. The remnants of towering wooden structures long since vanished. These weren't storage huts. They weren't homes. They were something more dramatic. Welcome to the realm of sky towers and shamanic platforms. Once, rising above this very space, were massive vertical buildings, constructed from hardwoods and vines, decorated with feathers, pigments, bone, and possibly gold. Some may have reached 5 or 6 stories high, remarkable for a society that built without cranes, metal nails, or modern scaffolding. Their purpose? That depends on who you ask. Scientists still argue, naturally, about whether these towers were temples, elite residences, astronomical observatories, or stages for public ceremonies. But what most researchers agree on is this: they mattered a lot. The builders chose their materials carefully, not just for function, but for meaning. The tree species used for the pillars were often sacred. The vines were braided into specific patterns. The entire tower may have acted as a ladder between the earthly world and the sky, the domain of spirits, ancestors, or gods. You walk the perimeter of one such circle now, your foot landing on soft earth that's probably seen 1,000 ceremonies. Shamans would have danced here, chanted, burned herbs that sent smoke spiraling upward like a signal to the cosmos. It's a strange thing, standing in the footprint of a vanished vertical world. A mainstream geographical detail you might have missed. Unlike many temperate forests, the Amazon has incredibly tall, straight, flexible trees, ideal for this kind of construction. Think of them as rainforest redwoods, and the ancient builders knew exactly which ones to use. They harvested selectively, treating the act itself as spiritual. And because the climate encouraged rapid decay, those towers eventually crumbled, but not before shaping entire worldviews. You step into the middle of one of the tower footprints. The soil here feels springy, almost lighter. Some archaeologists believe that these platforms had symbolic geometry: circle for eternity, square for balance, spiral for the journey between realms. You look around. If someone had stood here centuries ago and looked up, they might have seen the stars framed between the 4 beams of a wooden spire. And here's a fringe tidbit for you. There are stories, old, slippery, oral traditions passed between tribes, that describe towers where shamans would fast for days, suspended in wooden lofts high above the village. They'd claim to hear the voices of ancestors. Some even say they could fly, not with wings, but with dreams. Whether those stories are metaphor, myth, or memory, who's to say? You notice now that this site is surrounded by certain plants, psychotropic vines, flowering shrubs, trees known for their resin. This wasn't random foliage. It was a pharmacological garden, curated over generations to supply ceremonies, healings, and altered states. The shaman didn't just visit the spirit world, they took the local flora with them. There's evidence some platforms had wooden walkways leading to smaller side towers, possibly altars, possibly family shrines. This wasn't just architecture, it was cosmology made physical. And here's the kicker: these towers weren't always permanent. Some were built for single events, funerals, coronations, celestial alignments, and then disassembled. The forest reabsorbed them almost immediately, leaving only subtle earth signatures. It's architectural impermanence with spiritual permanence. You glance up, trying to imagine where the top of one tower might have reached. Would it have broken through the canopy? Caught moonlight? Let the stars pour in through its frame? Probably. That was the point. Some researchers argue that these towers acted like vertical maps, aligned to stars, mimicking constellations, designed to help interpret the heavens from a grounded position. Think Stonehenge, but made of vines. Less weatherproof, more vibe-heavy. You pass by a second ring, this one slightly smaller. It might have been a junior tower, or a ceremonial counterpoint. Maybe male and female towers, or earth and sky, or life and death. The dualities of Amazonian belief systems aren't always clear-cut, but they're always layered, and again, you're reminded, no stone, no bronze, no carved inscriptions, just geometry, soil, and the weight of memory. You sit at the edge of the main circle now, letting your breath slow. The forest around you is still. Even the insects hush for a moment. You can almost hear the echoes, chanting, drumming, the creak of wood as dancers leap from platform to platform. These towers weren't just buildings, they were performances, spaces where myths were made visible, where the line between audience and actor blurred. And yes, some scholars get twitchy about the word tower, because technically nothing survives. There's no blueprint. But the oral accounts are consistent. The earthworks match the pattern. The logic holds. You brush your hand over the moss. It's cool. The roots beneath it are old. Maybe some grew around the fallen beams of a temple that touched the sky. In modern cities, towers symbolize wealth, power, ambition. Here they symbolized connection to stars, spirits, time, and each other. They didn't rise for ego. They rose for balance. And when they fell, they did so gracefully, returning to the earth, feeding the forest, becoming myth. You stand again. The circle remains, quiet and unshakable. No stones, no statues, just the imprint of faith, shaped by wood and sky. And somewhere above you, far beyond the canopy, the stars still shine down on the footprints they once touched. You leave the tower ring behind, moving through a stretch of jungle that feels tighter somehow, more tangled. The underbrush reaches for your ankles like it wants a word. And as you duck under a bent palm, you land in a sun-dappled clearing with strange earthworks, long ridges, zigzagging trenches, narrow mounds and parallel lines. They look like crop rows gone rogue. But these aren't farms. You've stumbled onto the remnants of a battlefield, not the kind with cannonballs and bronze statues. No flags, no uniforms. Just carefully arranged terrain and the quiet knowledge that this part of the forest once echoed with war cries. Yes, war. Even here. Amazonian civilizations, like any others, had tensions. And when diplomacy failed, they didn't just sulk. They strategized, fought, captured, defended. Scientists still argue about the scale of these conflicts, whether they were isolated skirmishes or coordinated campaigns. But the archaeological evidence is mounting. Bastions, palisades, ditches dug for defense. Some settlements were built atop raised plateaus, surrounded by moats. Others had entry corridors designed to funnel attackers into traps. You walk along the edge of one such ditch now. It's nearly filled in with time, but you can still trace the shape. A semicircle, defensive, perfect for archers, or in this case, blow dart ambushers and spear throwers. And here's a mainstream fact you'll rarely hear in textbooks. Some Amazonian cities show signs of fortification over time. Earlier phases have open layouts, ceremonial in nature. Later ones, heavier walls, restricted access. Watchtowers, yes, even in wood. As if something shifted. Maybe population pressures, maybe resource stress, maybe good old-fashioned rivalries. The jungle didn't protect everyone equally, and not all disputes ended with handshakes and shared cassava. But their warfare looked different. Most Amazonian weapons were crafted from wood, bone, obsidian, and hardened bamboo. Spears and clubs, yes, but also sophisticated projectiles, like feathered darts, tipped with poison brewed from jungle frogs. That's right, they weaponized frogs. It's equal parts brilliant, and you definitely wouldn't survive this. You spot a small trench bisecting the clearing. Could have been a boundary or a shield wall. In some areas, these ditches were filled with sharpened stakes, hidden beneath palm fronds. Primitive? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Some fringe theorists suggest even more elaborate traps, swinging log systems, false paths, psychological warfare through sound and mimicry. One Spanish missionary wrote of entire villages that would vanish overnight into the forest, leaving only eerie recordings made with bamboo tubes that whistled in the wind. Whether it's true or just dramatic reporting is anyone's guess. But one thing's clear, these were not passive people. They built cities, yes, but also defended them. And they did it with the tools of their environment. You imagine it now. A watchman at the edge of a forested plateau, listening for distant drums. A council of elders debating whether to retreat to the fortified platform. Hunters doubling as scouts, vanishing into the underbrush at the first sign of threat. And unlike in other ancient empires, warfare here didn't necessarily mean annihilation. Captured enemies might be adopted. Ritual combat often had spiritual overtones. One chief might challenge another to send his best warrior forward. Not just to test strength, but cosmic favor. Still, it wasn't all symbolic. Burned structures, skeletons with embedded spear points, signs of hastily repaired earthworks. Real lives were lost. You pass a tree whose bark is scarred in a vertical pattern, maybe from age, maybe from blade. It's impossible to say. The jungle is excellent at blurring causes. What's fascinating is how warfare here was integrated into the ecology. The same forest that fed and sheltered these civilizations also served as camouflage, obstacle, and ally. Battles weren't fought in open fields. They were ambushes, traps, feints through thickets. You weren't just fighting your enemy, you were fighting the jungle on bad terms. And here's something worth pondering. Many Amazonian settlements were interlinked, not isolated. So when conflict erupted, it wasn't always tribal versus tribal. It might have been internal, a faction splitting off, a revolt, a broken alliance. The road you're walking now, it might have once carried warriors and couriers and grieving mothers. It doesn't remember the difference. It just carries the echoes. You pause at the edge of another mound, this one unusually tall. Defensive outpost, burial for a fallen warrior, or just an elevated lookout. Nobody knows for sure. And that's what makes this place so haunting. The evidence is suggestive, not declarative. No written records, no marble inscriptions, just ditches, platforms, and the faint hush of memory under the leaves. But let's not forget the resilience. Despite the conflict, Amazonian cities didn't crumble from war alone. They kept adapting, expanding, rerouting roads, reinforcing palisades. Many communities likely absorbed conquered peoples into new urban forms. And unlike other empires that collapsed in fire and pride, these cities melded into each other. They evolved, rebalanced, and rebuilt until the real catastrophe came in the form of germs. You glance around now, trying to read the land like a map. That ridge, a barricade. That depression, a safe zone. That flattened arc beyond the vines, maybe a mustering ground. Or maybe just a place where someone once sat, watching the trees move. The wind picks up slightly, and you swear you hear something. A low hum. Not quite insect, not quite wind. It's probably nothing. Probably. You keep walking, slowly, respectfully, because even though the forest has moved on, the shape of conflict still lingers here. Not with shouts or banners, just in silence and scars. The light shifts again as you step beyond the tangled earthworks into a patch of forest that feels curated. Trees line up a little too neatly. The undergrowth thins. The air feels open, symmetrical. It's not a plaza or a battlefield. It's something stranger, quieter, older, and infinitely more precise. You've entered one of the Amazon's most unusual remnants, a calendar forest. It looks ordinary. You'd never notice it if you weren't looking for it. But here, the trees aren't random. They're planted with intention. Each species selected for its bloom, time, fruit cycle, or specific alignment to the sun's path. Orchards as observatories, gardens that told time. You crouch near a ring of palms, tall, elegant, evenly spaced. Their trunks lean ever so slightly eastward. A coincidence? Maybe, but probably not. Some researchers now believe certain Amazonian orchards were designed to track the seasons, their growth and fruiting patterns synced with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar phases. And the implications are wild. These weren't just places to pick fruit. They were living clocks. Scientists still argue, as always, about whether this constitutes a true calendrical system or something looser, more spiritual than scientific. But either way, it's real. Some tree clusters bear fruit at precise times of year, not because nature decreed it, but because humans arranged it. They built the forest to bloom in rhythm. You brush your fingers across the leaves of a cacao tree. It's not flowering today, but you know it will. Probably just after the rainy season starts. And not alone. All across this zone, trees are syncing up. Like instruments in a symphony that only the locals could hear. That's the genius of it. These weren't isolated crops. They were ensembles. Avocado, guava, camu, inga, cacao. All planted in interlocking rings or crescent rows, designed not just for food, but for information. One ring blooms in January, another in March, another in June. Over time, a pattern emerges. The forest becomes a calendar, and the community becomes synchronized with the land. Here's a mainstream fact that's often missed. Tropical forests aren't as chaotic as they seem. Species emerge, fruit and seed in staggered waves. Predictable, if you know what you're looking for. The people who lived here, they didn't just know. They taught the forest how to count. A fringe tidbit for your inner philosopher. Some anthropologists believe these calendar forests weren't just for marking time, they were for making memory. Each blooming triggered festivals, rituals, or transitions. The yellow flowering of the IPA tree, time to prepare for the hunt. The fruiting of the acai grove, time to honor ancestors. The forest became a memory palace, a sensory reminder of cultural rhythms. And now, you're walking through those rhythms, even if most of them have faded. A soft breeze sets the branches swaying, and for a moment, the leaves rustle in waves, one side starting, the other catching up, like an echo passing through green time. You pause at a cluster of trees, whose trunks form a triangle. Again, not random. Some believe triangular patterns in planting were meant to reflect star constellations. Others say they helped optimize shade or nutrient flow. Either way, it's deliberate, purposeful, which brings us to the weird part, the spacing. Some of these trees are planted at consistent intervals, exactly 4 strides apart. Others are nested in Fibonacci spirals. Yes, those spirals, the golden ratio kind. The kind you find in sunflower seeds, hurricanes, and Romanesque cathedrals. Coincidence? Maybe. But if you're the type who thinks in patterns, and these ancient agronomists definitely were, you start seeing meaning everywhere. Even now, in this half-forgotten glade, you feel it. The land is singing a quiet math. And here's the beautiful trick. While the calendars of Rome or Mesopotamia were carved in stone, rigid and imperial, these ones were soft. They bent with the seasons. They shifted. They breathed. If a tree died, another was planted. The cycle continued. Time wasn't a line here. It was a circle, a bloom, a scent, a taste. You pick up a fruit from the ground, small, red and glossy, not ripe anymore, but still aromatic. Maybe once it marked the first rains. Maybe it once fed a festival. Maybe it just reminded someone that their grandmother was born under its bloom. There's no plaque here, no sundial, just life. You walk further, past an oddly linear arrangement of nut trees. These ones have thicker trunks, and their spacing matches cardinal directions. North to south, east to west, maybe a compass, maybe a story, maybe both. You remember a quote one anthropologist said about these forests. They aren't wild, they're whispering. You start to believe it. Another soft rustle. A bird takes flight. The canopy ripples, gold light filtering through like a sundial in motion. You stop again, realizing that this forest is keeping time, even if no one's listening. Its blooms still mark the turning of the earth. Its fruits still fall on cue. The clock is still ticking, even if the civilization that built it is gone. And that's the wonder of it. The forest became their memory, their language, their legacy. A garden that doesn't just feed, but remembers. You step quietly now, each bootfall echoing in your ears. Not because you're afraid to make noise, but because you don't want to interrupt the clock. You step out of the rhythm garden and into a denser stretch of jungle, where the trees grow at odd angles and the ground feels unsettled, like it hasn't quite decided what it used to be. This is a place of digging and arguing and slow revelation. A few meters ahead, the earth is disturbed. Shovels, stakes, measuring tape strung between saplings. This isn't ancient, it's now. You've arrived at a modern archaeological dig. Tents flap lightly in the shade, and backpacks rest on a fallen log like exhausted soldiers. Here, the past meets the present, and not always peacefully, because as LiDAR scans bring new sites into focus, teams of researchers flock to the jungle to dig, carefully, slowly, and sometimes competitively. And what they're uncovering, well, let's just say no one can agree on what it means. Scientists still argue, louder than ever, about what these ancient networks truly were. Cities? Ritual centers? Garden ecologies? Were they part of a grand Amazonian empire? Or just thousands of small, loosely affiliated communities using similar tricks? You crouch near one of the test pits. The stratigraphy is clear. Layers of dark earth, flecks of charcoal, a shard of red ceramic wedged between roots. It looks insignificant, but it could represent an entire tradition of pottery, diet, or trade. The smallest detail becomes a battleground of interpretation. Here is a mainstream fact. Archaeological consensus is slow, like glacial. It takes decades for new findings to filter from journal articles into textbooks, and even longer for those ideas to reach public consciousness. So while LiDAR scans have lit up the academic world, most people still think of the Amazon as untouched. They haven't gotten the memo. Some researchers propose these were true cities in the classic sense. Dense populations, centralized planning, social hierarchy, trade networks. Others push back. They argue for decentralized networks, clusters of settlements sharing technology and culture, but without singular capitals or imperial rulers. It's a question of scale and of ego. Do we need a king and a palace to call something a city? You glance at a flagged tree stump. One group of researchers claimed it was the base of a ceremonial totem. Another insisted it was just an old fruit tree. The debates get passionate. There's even disagreement on the term civilization. Some archaeologists resist using it for Amazonian societies, fearing it might impose Western frameworks onto indigenous cultures. Others argue that not calling these city builders a civilization is just another form of erasure. And the truth? The Amazon doesn't fit neatly into anyone's boxes. It never has. Here's a fringe tidbit. A few radical voices believe the Amazon was once home to an egalitarian megasystem, an ecologically balanced, non-hierarchical urban web. No emperors, no slaves. Just highly organized cooperation. Sound utopian? Maybe. But the evidence isn't easily dismissed. The lack of monumental tombs, the emphasis on food security, the evenly spaced infrastructure. If they were hierarchies, they didn't worship ego the way other civilizations did. You step over a rope line and into another section of the dig. A broken bowl, a bundle of charcoal, some bones, possibly chicken, possibly not. It doesn't look like much, but it could redefine an entire cultural sequence. The archaeologists here work with brushes more than shovels. Every scoop is a decision, every fragment a debate. Some believe these sites tell the story of rise and fall, classic urbanism with booms and busts. Others argue for continuity, with cultures evolving slowly, adapting rather than collapsing. Still others think the truth lies somewhere in between. Growth, followed by migration, followed by rebirth. And then there's the biggest debate of all. What do we do now that we know? You walk past a table cluttered with maps, notebooks, core samples. There's tension in the air, not hostility exactly, just the weight of knowing that each new discovery threatens someone's theory. But this is good, vital even, because for centuries, the Amazon was portrayed as a blank slate. a jungle outside of history, and now every artifact screams the opposite. People lived here, dreamed here, designed here. You sit on a mossy stone nearby. Maybe it's just a stone. Maybe it once supported a pillar. You don't need to decide right now. You let your mind wander back through the journey. The ringed cities, the black soil, the geoglyphs, the roads, the sky towers, the calendar forests. A civilization, or maybe a web of them, that didn't want to dominate the land, but work with it. And we missed it, because we were looking for empires, not relationships. You watch as a young researcher carefully lifts a piece of pottery, holds it to the light, and whispers something in awe. It's not about gold or conquest. It's about recognition. For too long, Amazonian cultures were framed by what they lacked. No stone, no writing, no wheels. But what they had, that's the revelation. They had ecology, sustainability, urban planning without pollution, calendars without clocks, agriculture without deforestation, community without concrete, and maybe, just maybe, that's civilization after all. You rise and leave the dig site behind. The forest folds over the disturbance like a patient healer, already reclaiming. No matter how much we argue, it always wins in the end. You follow a slope downward, boots sliding slightly in the damp clay, and suddenly the forest becomes soft again. The tension from the dig site fades. The arguments, the theories, the dusty reports, they dissolve under the hush of the canopy. You're in the jungle's oldest mode now, reclamation. This isn't about towers, roads, or calendars anymore. This is what happens after. You reach what looks like a shallow bowl in the forest floor. The air is cooler here, the light dimmer. Roots twist around in strange spirals, some curling over patches of stone barely visible beneath moss and leaf litter. A mound rises gently to your left, not big enough to be dramatic, not small enough to be a mistake. You're standing in the middle of what was once a city, and now is just forest again. Not erased, not destroyed, just taken back. This is the final act, the long exhale, the moment when the forest whispers, "You've had your time. I'll take it from here." Everywhere around you, the jungle has gently wrapped itself around the past. Vines drape across where doorways once stood. Birds nest in what might have been rooftops. A strangler fig grows in a perfect circle, perhaps following the perimeter of an ancient well. This wasn't conquest, it was closure. Somewhere nearby, a troop of monkeys chitters and crashes through the branches, indifferent to your reverence. That's the thing about this place. It doesn't need your awe. It will take your silence, but it doesn't demand it. You move through the glade slowly, your footsteps muffled by centuries of humus and broken time. Each stone you step over might have been part of a floor, a hearth, a wall, or it might just be a stone. And that's the point. The jungle doesn't label anything. It doesn't leave brochures. It just reabsorbs. Here's a mainstream fact that hits differently now. The Amazon rainforest grows faster than almost any forest on Earth. Trees shoot up. Vines colonize ruins in weeks. A fully grown city can vanish into green in less than a generation, especially if it was made of wood, clay, and earth. And here's the fringe reality. You never really know where you are out here. The satellite image might call it primary forest, but if you dig deep enough, or just look with the right eyes, you'll find history under every leaf. Which means this city, the one you're standing in, might have had a name once, a language, markets, songs. But now, it just has birdsong, rain drip, the squeak of bats, the distant groan of tree trunks shifting in the wind. You stop at a wide route that snakes in a perfect arc, not random. Trees grow around structures. Their roots trace old boundaries. If you're clever, you can sometimes read the city in the trees. Some researchers call these arboreal echoes. And now, you're listening to them. The structure of the jungle isn't wild. It's patterned. It grows around memory. You're walking through an archive without shelves. Scientists still argue, of course, about how much of the modern jungle is shaped by ancient hands. Some say 10%, some say 50%. A few whisper 100%. But what's clear now, crystal clear, is that the forest has been entangled with people for far longer than we admitted. It's not just a biome, it's a biography. You find yourself whispering, though no one's around, not out of fear, out of respect, because it feels like this place deserves quiet, not for mourning, but for gratitude. And here's a final, haunting little detail. In some places, tree rings reflect disturbance patterns. You can literally see in the wood when people stop burning fields, stop planting, stop clearing paths. The forest remembers, even when we don't. You cross a stream that may have once run between neighborhoods. Maybe someone stood here once, washing cassava or gutting fish, or just staring into the water like you are now, wondering where the time went. There are no signs, no plaques, no gifts for tourists. Just this, a forest that holds the memory of cities in its roots, its soil, its rhythm, and you, a visitor passing through a vanished world, one leaf crunch at a time. This isn't a ghost town. It's a forested library, and its doors are always open. You look up. The canopy arches above like a cathedral, and for a moment, just a moment, you don't feel like an intruder. You feel like a student. You settle into the mossy ground now, letting the weight of your body sink into the damp earth. The sounds of the forest continue around you, gentle, layered, unhurried. A rustle here, a distant chirp, the trickle of water winding somewhere unseen. Above you, the canopy ripples in slow waves, dark green fading into shadow as the sun dips low. Light filters through in thin golden bands. You breathe in the damp scent of leaves and age and loamy time. It's okay now. You don't need to remember every name or detail. You don't have to solve every argument or label every mound. You're not here to conquer knowledge. You're here to rest beside it. Let the questions float. Let the cities dissolve back into green in your mind, just as they did in the soil. The forest is patient. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't demand understanding. It just exists, breathing, remembering, continuing. Like you. You close your eyes. Maybe tomorrow you'll think about calendars made of fruit trees, about fish farms shaped like spirals, about laser maps that whisper the outlines of forgotten cities. But for now, it's just you and the hush and the slow, steady pull of sleep. The jungle will still be here, still watching, still waiting, still holding the memory of all the lives that passed before you, quietly, completely, and with love. Sweet dreams.